This work of fiction was designed, developed and produced by a multicultural team of various religious faiths and beliefs. This disclaimer at the beginning of Assassin's Creed is one of several reasons why this game has made joining Ubisoft my dream. One I successfully achieved by working at the studio for 6 years before leaving it. It is not a secret that Assassin's Creed is one of the most defining video games of my entire life. But this fact raises several important questions. How do you reconcile the positive impact a video game has made on you with learning that stories about arrogance and toxicity of its creative director run rampant within the company, that one of game designers would follow suit and would eventually become an equally arrogant and toxic lead hated by many but gaining editorial power regardless, or that some other people would get into actual physical abuse, like its game director becoming known for being an incredibly aggressive person that choked a woman in front of everyone? Well, you don't. You just accept that not everyone involved in the work you love was a good person. This doesn't take away any of the positive impact it had, nor does it remove the qualities of everyone else working on the game, especially those who have had a large influence and made it what it is, even when their names were left unknown or forgotten among the fans. That's not surprising when the creative director publicly spins a picture of essentially having the utmost importance over the direction of Assassin's Creed, when in fact it wouldn't have been what it is without people usually not mentioned anywhere. So it's ironic that a game focusing on the uncertainty of history and how it's presented has an uncertain history itself. But I'm not here to dwell on that irony. While Ubisoft upper management should be held accountable for its actions, or rather lack of actions that would lead to improving the internal culture, there are stories that are not up to me to tell. I'm here to dissect the very first Assassin's Creed, which was released on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2007 and PC in 2008 with a somewhat expanded version labeled Director's Cut. As of now, that is the definitive way to play Assassin's Creed, thanks to some quality of life improvements as well as new investigation mission types. While some things are not entirely clear-cut with the latter, the PC version is still the best way to experience the game. I have to warn you that the ending will be spoiled in this video, so play the game first if need be. My name is Stanislav Costiuc, I am a game designer, and this is my review of Assassin's Creed, which as always will be done with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system, starting with the first category, Design. This is the most important section of Stasocritic with the biggest score weight, 4. Games are interactive experiences, so of course what is valued most is how well they form those experiences. Assassin's Creed aims to recreate the way the medieval order of assassins worked, at least in their romanticized form. Approach a target in broad daylight without being noticed, strike, and escape. This fantasy forms the core loop of the experience. Approach, assassinate, escape. That's what you'll be doing in every important main mission and most of the side activities. How we approach this loop is what defines the core pillars. Assassins are one with the crowd until they attack, so stealth of course is a pillar. More precisely, social stealth. Traditional stealth of course also works and fits the fantasy, but it is about not being seen at all. Social stealth is about being undetected while being seen, through acting as if you belong, and that's what Assassin's Creed is focusing on. Then, when assassins make their kill, they would have to deal with the guards in the vicinity, right? Therefore, combat becomes an important aspect as well. And finally, after everybody is dealt with, the assassin has to make their escape, and in this game they do so by being very nimble and having the ability to climb every ledge and handhold, which makes parkour another core pillar. All these concepts are the main meat of the fantasy, to the point that they're all precisely what is being sold to us in the announcement trailer. Our main character Altair makes his approach towards the execution platform, deals with guards, assassinates the target, escapes, and becomes one with the crowd. But that's the culmination of the fantasy, the most striking part. A game can't be just about that, otherwise there will be no contrast or anticipation. So between these moments, Assassin's Creed focuses on the more, let's call it, day-to-day part of being an assassin. After all, it is essentially a job you have to prepare for. So as Altair, we first have to receive the target's name, travel to the respective city of residence, investigate the target through special missions, and only then go in for the kill. That becomes the mid-term loop of Assassin's Creed. The game then spreads out this loop 9 times, once for each target, across what it defines as memory blocks, as well as several specially structured memory blocks at the beginning and the end. All those are intertwined with some modern-day segments. Everything that we do as the assassin Altair is actually us viewing genetic memories of one Desmond Miles through a machine known as the Animus. And this futuristic contraption is used to explain away a lot of game mechanics in a smart way, but that will be a topic for the Cohesion segment. Now, knowing how Assassin's Creed is widely considered to be very repetitive, you might be looking at this structure of loops and think this is why. But let's be absolutely clear, it is but a structure. All great games are built out of different long, mid and short-term loops and can be essentially shown this way. The devil lies in the details, and with Assassin's Creed in particular, the devil is a very curious one. You see, most games try to hide their cyclical nature by wrapping the loops around many different contexts. Assassin's Creed is not like that. It openly showcases its structure to everyone, which is what makes it feel repetitive. But there is also a reason it does that. You see, it was originally designed to be played fully without a HUD. And that in an open world setting means you need to be really considerate about the clarity of what you're asking the player to do. For example, all assassination missions are started from within the Assassin Bureau because you can't just send players straight over to many different locations and expect them to be comfortable in finding where exactly did you put that starting point. So they need to know and see the structure. But without a HUD, that is also not that big of a problem, as many actions become more involved. When you need to go to another city and an icon shows where it is, you just follow it, right? Well, how do you do that without a map? You become mindful of your surroundings and follow signposts that show which way to go to the city you are interested in. When you reach the city and need to get to the bureau, with an icon you just, well, go there. But what do you do without? You search for a building with a specific golden dome that has the assassin insignia on the roof. And now that you're there, Rafiqs give you information in a very detailed manner.
I would suggest you seek out the following places. A small souk northeast of here, the madrasa to our east, and in the gardens north of this bureau.
That's not just long boring dialogue that prevents you from continuing towards the next icon, that is important information you need to actually listen to, as when you get out it will help you to learn the environment based on the landmarks that were mentioned, navigate around the city and notice things. For example, most heralds yell out generic blabber about Richard or Saladin, and this propaganda becomes so ingrained in your mind that you stop really caring about what these town criers say.
Though the road is long and your trials many, know that God watches over you. It is His hand that guides our warriors to victory. First in Acre, soon in Jaffa.
And then suddenly you hear somebody talking about your target.
We must rely on men who are stronger in their convictions. Men like William of Montferrat.
That's an investigation opportunity. You will never see civilians talk to one another in this game, so it becomes instantly noticeable when there are some that clearly do. Another investigation opportunity, one that you find not by simply following an icon, but by knowing that there is an abandoned market northwest of the bureau that merits watching. So you actually have to be attentive of your surroundings, notice what looks like an abandoned market, and then find the mission there. There are many little details that will help with the core gameplay as well. For example, you know you have the iconic assassin hidden blade selected because Altair does a hand flick signifying your choice. Or you know how many throwing knives you've got because they're all properly shown on holsters. And then at the end of it all, when you need to escape after an assassination, you know how to get back to the bureau because by this time you have learned all the landmarks enough to be able to triangulate which way to go to report about your success. And while the cities are relatively large, they're actually not that big. And landmarks are specifically put in such a way that there is minimal repetition so it wouldn't get you confused. Exploring and searching for investigation opportunities is a big part of the assassin fantasy, but with HUD it just disappears. No longer do you need to care where the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem is because somebody may know information about your target there, you just go to an icon. And when you get there, the mission is just a boring sit and eavesdrop affair because you didn't go through the process of actually finding the place. Some simple missions gain interesting design implications in a HUD-less situation. For example, an informant asks to deal with a soldier who is tracking him. How do you find the target without a HUD? Well, you actually have to think a little bit differently, and knowing that the informant is being tracked, wait and watch who approaches the area. While with the HUD, you just easily find a single soldier on a linear pathway and dispose of them in less than 30 seconds. The original Assassin's Creed had only 5 investigation mission types: eavesdropping, stealing, interrogation, assassination, and flag races. And while that last one is pretty weird in the context of the fantasy, all these missions worked perfectly well in a HUD-less environment. They're relatively simple and straightforward, sure, but they work because they are a culmination of a bigger search process. Plus, without a HUD, even simple things can become more involved. The PC version, and this is where we get into the questionable territory mentioned in the very beginning, adds 4 new investigation mission types, but they don't follow the HUD-less design principles anymore. 2 of them, archer assassinations and informant escorts, do work well without icons, but the other 2, destroying market stalls and rooftop races, don't, because you have really no idea where you need to go. So if you try to play the PC version without a HUD, do keep that in mind. But if it's your first playthrough, I wouldn't suggest trying it HUD-less anyway, because I do understand why the HUD exists in Assassin's Creed. First, it's a matter of simple accessibility, and the game is honestly lacking in this regard. You won't even find subtitles here, and with no HUD-less ways to help people who, for example, have issues with spatial perception, yes, of course, icons would be needed. Plus, there is nothing in the game that teaches players cultural terminology. I will be honest, I wouldn't know without googling what is a madrasa, and even after figuring it out, I don't know how I will differentiate it from other buildings within the game without playing it beforehand. And just in general, Assassin's Creed doesn't do quite enough to be fully successful in its HUD-less nature. There are important things missing. For example, while the borough buildings can be differentiated by a particular dome and an insignia on the roof, nobody ever tells you that. And without knowing what you're looking for, from the distance, that dome isn't special enough to draw attention. There is also not enough audio and visual hints for different aspects. Sure, you can hear the town criers, but other mission types don't have audio cues. While visually, there are often not enough indicators that there are investigation opportunities nearby. Some can be located in very tight, easily missable spots. But it is worth noting that you don't need to complete all investigations to commence assassination. Just 2 or 3 are enough depending on the target. And this is another reason why without a HUD the game feels less repetitive. There is no incentive to complete absolutely all missions. When you have an icon, it is actively calling you towards it, but without any, it is all just a matter of what you can actually find, and you're less likely to find absolutely all content and notice that there is not a lot of it in the game. Now, I personally wouldn't agree that Assassin's Creed needs more stuff. There is certainly beauty in games that don't jam things to do at every corner, and the focus on the investigation assassination loop provides a very clear, memorable experience. But Assassin's Creed itself certainly seems to have considered the relatively small number of missions to be problematic. How else one would explain the inclusion of 420 absolutely useless flags, collecting which won't do anything, and 60 of a bit more interesting and menacing but in the end equally useless random Templars to assassinate? Sure, they technically help to raise your synchronization bar, in other words health, but so does everything else in the game. At least another often met type of side content, saving citizens, is actually useful. Your map will start getting full of vigilante groups that help you escape, and monks with which you can blend to infiltrate different locations. And that actually influences how you play the main assassination missions. Vigilantes obviously are useful after you've done the deed, while monks will help you get close to your target. There are some that appear in main mission areas only after rescuing them. Though the game doesn't make that relationship between side activities and main missions entirely clear. Assassin's Creed does try to add a certain aspect of pre-planning, but it's quite obfuscated. When you complete investigation missions, you'll get different documents, some are letters that delve deeper into the game's plot and mystery, and others are maps that showcase guard patrols, effective approach points, and so on. Those documents are accessed in a very unclear way. I myself didn't know about them until my second or third playthrough of the game. But I also can't say that they matter that much. While you can make plans in advance, most of the time you play through the natural process of improvisation, analyzing situations on the spot and defining what you can do. This improvisation aspect affects the navigation part of the game the most, where you can parkour and climb, as that's what will define your approach. And it is interesting to note that despite Assassin's Creed's biggest feature being the ability to climb every handhold, most surfaces are not full of handholds, which means you can't climb absolutely everything. This is by no means a criticism, as it actually leads to interesting choices. If you need to infiltrate a fortress, you can't just choose any wall to climb, but have to search for an applicable route to get to the top. This applies to all environments. While running around city rooftops, you often need to plan a little bit ahead. If you need to escape from guards, climbing the first wall you see might not be the best solution. And even climbing viewpoints requires more actions than just pressing up. All this makes you more involved with the process of parkour. And parkour in Assassin's Creed is undoubtedly revolutionary. There is a good reason why back in the day it wowed so many people. But it is inconsistent and buggy. Altair often fails to grab handholds, at times jumps not where you want him to, sometimes to the point that when you clearly intend to jump forward, Altair goes somewhere to the side. It is also not unusual for Altair to stick his head out of a ledge, which can lead to failing an investigation mission where you have to stay undetected. At the same time, there is depth to it. While you can't just always mindlessly run forward, to be efficient at navigating the environment, you need to perform more actions. You can do combos of running up the wall and side ejecting to reach something you normally wouldn't be able to. When you approach a ledge, if you don't hold the free run button, you can safely drop down instead of jumping forward. And with the handheld grab action, you can climb walls in creative ways. Though, given what I have said, the most important aspect of grabbing, which sadly is not available until several memory blocks in, is to fix the game's mistakes. As whenever something weird happens, you can course correct thanks to the grab. In time, we will learn some other tricks to avoid the game just doing whatever, like when to release the free run button so Altair wouldn't jump on some plank you didn't want to. But even with all that kind of stuff in mind, sometimes you'll just have to face Altair doing something that you can't fix, so it can make you question why do you need to bother learning all the game's intricacies. In the end, parkour in Assassin's Creed remains a revolutionary system with the potential to be amazing, but it's not quite there yet. And that statement applies to pretty much every Assassin's Creed core gameplay mechanic. For example, combat. In principle, it is absolutely fantastic. First and foremost, the animations are great, the tight choreography allows the moves to be flashy and noticeable but short enough to keep you in the flow. The basics of combat are such that you need to hit enemies with a certain rhythm to perform a combo. The combo may be lethal or non-lethal depending on how much health the enemy has left, and the rhythm depends on your chosen weapon, with the sword having a slower one and the dagger faster. You also have a variety of other moves like stepping in, dodging, heavy attacks, grabbing, and so on. The most interesting part of this combat system is that your enemies have access to the same moves as you do, it is just the amount of moves they know depends on how skilled they are, with the highest ranking enemies, Templars themselves, being on an absolutely equal footing with Altair. This makes sense contextually. After all, you're all humans with specific training, but also in terms of design it adds an interesting dynamic to combat. A dynamic that is ruined with two pretty big flaws. First, you have absolutely amazing defensive tools, those being mainly counterattack and counter-grab. You really don't need anything else to be successful against enemies, which promotes certain strategies where you just wait for them to attack. The other big flaw relates to the aforementioned interesting aspect of enemies having the same moves as you. They can also counterattack and counter-grab, and you have absolutely no way to counter their counter. This actively discourages all offensive, as at any point you can be punished for it. So what should feel like a skillful ballet of death often transforms into just long waits of somebody making their move so you could counter them, and that just doesn't feel good. The only part of counterattack that works well in its current form is the hidden blade. It can be used offensively only if enemies are taunting or in shock. You can't block attacks with it, but you can counter and kill absolutely anybody with one hit. Bosses as well, including the very final one, and just skip all stages of the fight that way. This feels amazing, and what balances out this power is that the counter window is very short and specific, so it rewards your skill. I'm not saying that the other weapons should follow the exact same pattern, but in its current state all combat depth is easily ignored in favor of safe, passive strategies. Combat is most engaging in Assassin's Creed when neither you nor enemies have access to these powerful counter tools, and that is saying something. Which leads us to social stealth. Conceptually it is once again fantastic. Act like one of many citizens, more than anybody has ever seen in open world games before, and you will not be detected. Sounds great, but it too comes with caveats. Now, the most often criticism I have seen against the social stealth of Assassin's Creed is the fact that you can blend only with monks, which to me is a weird statement that absolutely misses the point. Monks are essentially a hiding spot, they're not the social aspect. They're a tool that helps you become invisible when you have failed at the social aspect and made yourself discovered. Not to mention, you also have a blend action, ability to impersonate a monk whenever, which sacrifices speed for invisibility. Even suspicious guards won't care for you when you're praying unless you get close. The core of social stealth is not about being able to blend with everyone, but about acceptable actions. As long as you don't run, push, fight with people, or do any unacceptable actions like, let's say, I don't know, kill someone in plain sight, you will not get detected. And that part works perfectly well in Assassin's Creed. So why then is social stealth still not fleshed out enough? Well, imagine a traditional stealth game where you can't distract guards in any way, not even by throwing rocks or making a noise somewhere. You can be only seen or not seen, and that's everything you can work with. That is the equivalent of the state of social stealth in Assassin's Creed. You can be only either detected or undetected, but you can't influence the systems in any way. You can't manipulate the crowd so the guards will detect somebody else instead of you. In fact, the crowd always actively works against you. There's jug carriers who, when touched, will drop everything if you don't do a gentle push on their approach. Even if they bump into you, it will still be your fault. There's drunks and crazy people who try to keep pushing you, and again, when they succeed, you are the one who gets detected rather than those far more noticeable personalities. Everything is out there to get you, and there's no way you can use the systems to avoid that or turn around to your advantage. But one definite big plus that came out of the social stealth system is the need to separate all your actions between high profile and low profile through what the game calls a Puppeteering control scheme. I think it is very easy to underestimate how good this kind of system is for people who don't usually play games. It is much simpler to understand the controls when there is a button responsible for head, button responsible for legs, and 2 other buttons for each hand, each with their own clear set of actions that are either low-key or very noticeable depending on if you hold down the high-profile trigger or not. The disadvantage of this approach is that some buttons may get a little bit overloaded in comparison to others. For example, triangle Y button would be the least used here, as the only action that your head is responsible for is eagle vision. Also, due to the required inputs on controllers, you can't really rotate the camera while free-running unless you hold it like a claw or something, which is not a problem with keyboard and mouse. Anyway, we have discussed Assassin's Creed on a structural level, how it has really good principles, but doesn't do quite enough to fulfill them to their full potential. We dissected the core gameplay, which is revolutionary for its time and has a lot of good ideas, but again is either flawed or not fleshed out. Time to talk about the middle layer, the actual missions themselves that you'll be completing in this structure using the core gameplay. And they share a quite similar fate. The meat of the game mission-wise is in its assassination levels, and they can be quite hit and miss. The best assassinations are definitely in Akka. Each mission there has a hefty chunk of the city dedicated to the target. The hospital for Garnier, fortress for William, and port for Sibrand. Each provides a variety of infiltration and escape approaches, from monks to scaffoldings to unguarded windows to different ship positions. And yes, each setup obviously is pretty unique for the target. These missions take full advantage of the game's pillars and approach assassinate escape loop. The assassinations in Damask are ultimately not that impressive. Tamir is just a person walking around the market, but he's the first target, so that's fine. Jubair's assassination is more about finding the building with the right person, but the layout itself is pretty basic. Abul Nuqad's mission is the more interesting of the 3 targets in the city, as you have to find a way how to escape the party where he ordered to murder everyone, but there is no real infiltration opportunities as the door is just open. And Jerusalem missions are probably the most disappointing. 2 of them force you to fight for one reason or another with very simple approaches, though in both cases it is justified in terms of narrative, while the assassination of Majd ad-Din is very basic, but one can't deny that it's incredibly atmospheric with its execution platform setup, which I enjoy greatly. Each assassination mission is followed by the whole city getting on high alert. If you get into a chase at this moment, it is especially tense and long, guards just don't want to let you go. And even outside of chases, they're incredibly suspicious, so you have to be always on your guard and act very carefully. Atmospherically, these are the most amazing moments of the game. It feels like all hell breaks loose with town bells ringing throughout the city, music going full-on electronics, and Animus effects regularly appearing on the screen. A great contrast to how missions feel before the kill. Outside of main assassinations, there's the prologue and finale missions, and they're not great. The beginning is a set of overly long tutorials. First, you have a long Animus simulation tutorial that teaches you pretty much all the mechanics, even those that you won't use for a while. Then there is the introduction sequence, which teaches again some of the things that you were taught in the Animus tutorial. Then there is a relatively exciting action sequence that teaches combat, climbing, and most importantly, leap of faith, followed by a sequence teaching about investigations, which could just be cut and taught in Damask instead. It doesn't flow well, neither in terms of narrative introduction nor gameplay, but it is still better than the ending missions, which are about throwing 20 enemies at you over and over and over and over and over and over again, and you can't progress until you kill them all. Though you might be wondering one thing. Close to the beginning I mentioned that there's modern day sections, but didn't talk about them at all so far. Well, the reason is simple. You can't do anything in those sections except talk and read emails. While I find them really fascinating from a narrative perspective, we'll talk about that later, in terms of design they really don't have a lot to offer, and that's for sure one of the reasons why some people might not have liked them, even if modern day is a huge part of the game's identity. That seems to be a running theme with this game. There is a reason I loved it so much back in 2008 when it was released for PC. It has got just so many great ideas and concepts. The whole notion of being put in a city full of civilians where you have to act like you're one of them to approach your target is just fantastic. And I still love all this many years later. But one can't deny that pretty much everything design-wise in Assassin's Creed also comes with some caveats. And if we take a look at all available Stasocritic scores for the design category, feel free to pause the video if you'd like to read them all, everything that I have said leads to assigning a 6. Conceptually, everything is great, but all of it is either not fleshed out enough or comes with a variable number of flaws. That said, I can't deny that I love the relative simplicity of Assassin's Creed. With the exception of flag collectibles, it really doesn't have anything extraneous and superfluous, anything that it doesn't need. I really appreciate that. You don't need dozens and dozens of weapons, hundreds of missions, kilometers of space. You can be really tight and focused, and there's something special in that, even when it's flawed. And now let's talk about the next category, context. This is a category about everything that provides context to gameplay, plot, characters, motivation, etc. The weight of scores here is 1 because context is something that usually enhances the experience but doesn't necessarily define it. Though of course Assassin's Creed is a narrative-heavy game and it plays a big role here. And you have to admire what it tried to achieve, especially considering the context of many games in 2007. The main character, Altair, is an Arab who is part of an assassin sect, kills people for a living, and for all intents and purposes can be categorized as a terrorist. And to have him as a protagonist is not something you would expect from a AAA title of those times, but that is certainly appreciated. More diversity is always welcome. Of course, even though Altair's job is to kill people, he is not a villain protagonist. The assassins in this game follow a creed to protect humanity against enslavement by Templars. Nothing is true, everything is permitted, and the whole game is about understanding what these words really mean.
What is the truth? We place faith in ourselves. We see the world the way it really is, and hope that one day all mankind might see the same.
What is the world, then?
An illusion, one which we can either submit to, as most do, or transcend.
What is it to transcend?
To recognize nothing is true and everything is permitted, that laws arise not from divinity but reason. I understand now that our creed does not command us to be free. It commands us to be wise.
Do you see now why the Templars are a threat?
Whereas we would dispel the illusion, they would use it to rule.
Yes, to reshape the world in an image more pleasing to them.
And on that journey, the game will partake in criticism of religion and people who blindly follow faith, to the point that Jesus is stated to be a fraud.
Do you understand now? The Red Sea was never parted. Water never turned to wine. It was not the machinations of Iris that spawned the Trojan War, but this! Illusions! All of them!
There is a reason why Assassin's Creed begins with a disclaimer. You can throw serious shade on big cultural touchstones. And it gets away with it because it does so through the use of ancient artifacts of a long-lost civilization. It's very easy to criticize Assassin's Creed for being cheesy and ridiculous because the central conflict essentially revolves around ownership of a mind-controlling ball, but at the same time, in the context of its narrative, that is no less ridiculous than the notion of an all-seeing god. And similarly, with the modern day, it taps into the concepts of people being gullible and believing anything that might be written in a book, and again does so through the lens of a conspiracy theory that too many people easily dismiss.
Anyone can write a book, and they can put whatever they want on its pages. Anything. Used to be, we thought the world was flat.
Some people still do.
Yes, and they publish books about it. Or that the moon landing was a hoax. I believe there's also a book claims the world was created in 7 days. A bestseller, too.
And this is why Assassin's Creed is deeper than it looks and can say a lot of poignant things without getting targeted. You are far less likely to appear in the news as that video game that tries to corrupt impressionable minds by stating that God doesn't exist and a lot of what we do is caused by the fear of nothingness which awaits us in death, when all that is accompanied by a magic ball that creates illusions. At the same time, the other side of that coin is that people easily miss the point for the same reason. It can be very easy to say that the game isn't political because of the surface elements, which is not only not true, but the game itself calls out Altair for thinking like that.
I've never been one for politics.
But surely you realize your every action shapes the course of this land's future. You are a politician too, in your own way.
Assassin's Creed is full of great memorable dialogue, the best of which is spread out across the surreal death confessions. Each one not only gives you something to think about, but also is a step forward in Altair's character progression, who starts out as arrogant and full of himself, but going through this journey of redemption he learns humility, respect, and the true meaning of the creed.
But before I close my eyes, I must know what will become of my children.
You mean the people made to suffer your cruel experiments? They'll be free now to return to their homes.
Homes? What homes? The sewers? The brothels? The prisons that we dragged them from?
You took these people against their will.
Yes. What little will there was for them to have. Are you really so naive? Do you appease a crying child simply because he wails? But I want to play with fire, Father. What would you say? As you wish. Then you'd answer for his burn.
These are not children, but men and women full grown.
In body, perhaps, but not in mind. Which is the very damage I sought to repair.
You're not going to like Altair in the beginning, but you're not supposed to. The problem is, though, that the game doesn't establish well enough why he's considered to be so skillful, you don't spend enough time with him before he's demoted, and all you see is him making the wrong decisions. So the beginning might have quite a bit of what can be considered as unjustified negative emotions. It doesn't help that the pacing of the first part of the game is too slow. You start with a huge exposition dump. I think this is why people tend to have negative first impressions about the modern day. You didn't even manage to do anything in the historical part before you're thrown into a laboratory that just dumps all this information on you, and that is followed by a very long Animus tutorial. It takes about 40 minutes to get to what can be considered the start of Altair's story. While the modern day is very interesting conceptually, almost nothing happens in it and there is no thematic connection to the historical part at all. The whole character arc Altair goes through isn't connected to what Desmond is doing, which is not much unless you want to. So it doesn't feel like an extension necessarily, but something that rips you out of the main experience. If you start investigating around as Desmond and dig into the lore by participating in dialogues and checking emails and snooping at night, you will find that Assassin's Creed sets up a very interesting conflict. The end of the world, but not a literal one. It's metaphorical, with the date of 21st December 2012 representing the launch of a Templar satellite that would house the ancient artifact that can control people's minds. It is a natural extension of the historical Assassins vs Templars conflict and is an interesting subversion of the world-ending tropes. It is a shame that later on the series decided to play the tropes straight and put the satellite Templar plan on the wayside. And just in general, the whole concept of going through genetic memories to relive the lives of your ancestors is very unique. It provides interesting storytelling possibilities, as well as aesthetics and style that would stand out. I really don't understand why at the game's release people criticize this aspect so much. Sure, with the Animus it is not a purely historical game, but it also gives the series its own flair, something no other historical action-adventure franchise would have. You can criticize the implementation of modern day in the game, sure, but to me this doesn't change the fact that conceptually Animus is an incredible device. Now, just because I said that the beginning of the game is poorly paced, don't expect Assassin's Creed to suddenly become snappy with its plot progression after the tutorial sections. It still has a slower pace, but it also creates this methodical rhythm to everything that is going on, which is what is absent from the starting section. Every main target is a part of a greater scheme, a chess piece of a larger game, and with every kill you get a greater understanding of how everything is connected and what is going on, what are the actual goals of your enemies and how they try to achieve them. And every prominent character, even the two nameless allied Rafiks, are memorable in one way or another. But not because of quirkiness or strangeness, but because of their dialogue and interactions with Altair. While there are a lot of NPCs that talk, the actual cast is pretty small. In the modern day, there is just 3 people, Desmond, Vidic and Lucy. The historical cast is larger, but it focuses on 5 people from the assassin side, Altair, his mentor Al-Mualim, and the 3 Rafiks, one of which is more special than the others because he caused the death of his brother. And from the Templar side, we have the 9 named targets. That's it, and you can say that's not much for an open world game, but each character has an impact on the one you play as, and you have an impact on every other character. Literally every assassin goes through an arc, and while the Templars are static characters, there is an arc in terms of our understanding of each one. When you investigate a target, you only know about their horrible deeds, but then during the death confessions everything takes a different context and you start questioning whether you're doing the right thing. Ultimately, you are, but the fact that you can have doubt is what makes this story so great. Let's take a look at all the scores for the context category now. I will assign a 9 to Assassin's Creed. It features an intricate plot, a compelling character arc, a lot of great writing, world building, and touches upon very serious themes. It could have been assigned a 10 were it not for a number of issues with its pacing and lack of events in the modern day sections. But it is unique in many regards. Now let's go to our next topic, aesthetics. This is another category that's got a weight of 1, because once again it is about something that doesn't necessarily define the experience, but enhances it through visuals, sounds, music and everything else related to aesthetic pleasure. Let's get one thing straight out of the way. In terms of pure graphical fidelity, Assassin's Creed still looks amazing. It certainly was fantastic back in 2007, and nowadays it doesn't show its age much. But in this particular video I don't want to spend time talking about graphical implementation, there has been enough footage to show just how great and polished it is. I want to talk about style and more importantly grit. Assassin's Creed is a gritty game, but it doesn't achieve that by being brown and colorless, by making everyone swear all the time, or through adding over-the-top violence. First and foremost, it does grit by making everything feel lived in, including clothing. The textures on all these fabrics don't look clean and pristine, like it is a reenactment of medieval times, but it is also not full of dirt or blood. It has all the little subtle flaws that clothing gets when you wear it for a while, just enough to get the feeling of this being something that characters didn't just put on after laundry. Sound plays a big part as well, especially the ambience. Assassin's Creed has a limit of 100 total NPCs in the vicinity, and while it may sound a lot, it is still a limit that prevents developers from adding every possible character that would fit the environment. Ambient sound fills all these holes. Listen to this. And here is what it is attached to. You may notice that visually the game doesn't represent a lot of elements that you hear – dogs, babies, musicians, chicken, but it still feels like they exist somewhere because you hear them. Once again, it makes the world feel lived in. When it comes to violence, Assassin's Creed doesn't go for over-the-top depictions of blood or injuries. And with sound, the game chooses to provide contrast by adding crunchy effects that stand out just enough. When Altair breaks somebody's bones, there are no yells, no dismemberment, just some front-sounding crunchy sounds. Honestly, that makes you feel even more queasy than any over-the-top depiction would. And we can't talk about the sound effects without mentioning the deeply satisfying hidden blade metal sounds that always take the center stage when you use it. The Animus adds more mysticism to the visuals. When you see an area that is blocked from Altair's memories or a synchronization message or look through the menu itself, it adds to that grittiness. The sci-fi elements are not squeaky clean, they also feel lived in. Music acts as the connective tissue between history and the Animus. The soundscape consists of instruments or sounds that you would hear back in the day, but with a hint of electronics. City of Jerusalem track is a great example of that. Using this style of instrumentation, the game can not only generate an appropriate atmosphere for each city, but also create a feeling of tension, like for example the investigation track aka Underworld. Assassin's Creed music goes almost completely electronic only after performing main assassinations, when all hell breaks loose and the whole city is alert of your actions. Honestly, this adds a much more energetic, tense feeling than any traditionally sounding historical music would, and this wouldn't have been possible without the Animus layer. This song, Access the Animus, is the closest thing Assassin's Creed has got to a main theme. Not because it is one, but it is the only sound that you hear across many different cities. The rest of the game's soundtrack is fully focused on different types of actions, with each city having their own specific music representing those actions that can include combat, stealth, horse riding, and just simple ambience. I think lack of a specific game theme would be a problem for the franchise later, but that's not part of this video's analysis. What is though is defining the aesthetic score based on my Stasocritic system, to which I shall assign a 10. The game looks amazing, sounds great, and just in terms of style it is gritty and crunchy without being needlessly over the top. Now let's talk about Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it is all about how well the game combines all its different elements together to create a single cohesive whole. Assassin's Creed has introduced the Animus, and I think that it is just a genius contraption. Not only is it unique for narrative and aesthetic purposes, and can be used to explain absolutely any gameplay mechanic. For example, your character never dies. It is you who gets desynchronized with a memory. Health becomes synchronization, which means that when you get hit, you desynchronize a bit, implying that the ancestor didn't actually get wounded. After every open world battle, there is a resynchronizing sign, so if you decide to go on a rampage and kill thousands of guards, well, it doesn't mean that Altair actually did all that. Some people say that the game reminding you that you're in the Animus makes you feel less immersed. I disagree, because it ruins immersion only if you try to ignore the concept of the Animus in the first place and try to forget that modern day exists. And that's sort of thrown away a pretty big part of Assassin's Creed's identity. Of course, the Animus is not the only thing that makes everything feel cohesive in Assassin's Creed. It is the general approach to what content and mechanics we have. As mentioned once previously, outside of flags, there is really nothing superfluous in this game. Everything has a purpose. You are an assassin. You have a job, and this job has a number of responsibilities you have to perform. This is why you're going to the bureau, doing investigations, traveling between cities. That's what your life as an assassin is. The absence of day-night cycle also plays into this. It is a job that is always done in broad daylight to send a message. Assassin's Creed excels at showing what life of an assassin would be, at least in the context of this fictional in-game world. The difficulty progression is also natural within the context of the world and the story. For example, your first target works in the poor district of Damask. Because nobody there has lavish houses, the parkour in this part of the city is simpler, but also in terms of story, nobody really cares about what happens with the people of the district, which is how Tamir's black market deeds pass by unnoticed. After your first target, you get a choice between Akka and Jerusalem, and both have reasons why the game becomes more difficult. Parkour becomes more challenging because in Jerusalem you have to visit the rich district with more complex buildings, while in Akka there is more destruction. And likewise, you will start finding more guards, on rooftops especially, because, well, in Jerusalem the rich have to be protected, while Akka is a city that has recently undergone a siege. And what Garnier and Talal, our two targets in those cities, were doing is taking the desperate and crazy people off the streets to try and clear their mind, brainwashing into service. And after you kill those two people and their plan goes awry, well, that's when you start finding more drunks and mad people on the streets, impeding your progress. It's those little things that add to the wholesomeness of the experience, how everything is woven together. When you get out into the modern day, everything is shown through the filter of a security camera, including the interaction prompts. There is just a lot of attention to detail. This is not to say that there are no hiccups. The flags I have mentioned a number of times are one. They just don't make sense, not only the flags in the open world, but also missions where you're asked to collect flags in exchange for information. Then some of the abilities that were taken away from you after demotion are questionable. Some make sense, like for example grabbing is connected to gloves, so you can't grab handholds mid-air until you get your gloves back. That's logical. But some are actions that aren't connected to equipment. Why did Altair suddenly forget how to counterattack? Or what really prevents him from being able to push people away? These are things that don't really gel well with the principle of taking all your skills away to then give them back. But it should be noted that the Animus softens the blow a bit, as it might as well be connected to how well you're synchronized with the ancestor. In the end, if we take a look at the possible scores for Cohesion, these hiccups don't prevent Assassin's Creed from getting assigned a 10 in this category. Not only is the Animus framework perfect for explaining away every mechanic the game has, but also on a holistic level, Assassin's Creed makes you feel what it's like to be an assassin during the Crusades. How their job goes, what they will be doing, all that is nicely connected with a wide array of story and gameplay elements, allowing you to really immerse yourself into everything that is happening. And now let's talk about emotions. This is the most subjective part of Stasocritic, as it is all about personal feelings, but it also has got the second biggest weight, 3, because personal feelings matter a whole lot. And let's be absolutely clear, despite the flaws it has, I absolutely adore the first Assassin's Creed. I always have had. It is a very important title to me, and there is nothing that will change that. First, I find it very unique from the perspective of what it is as a game, the way it approaches gameplay, world and narrative. It is not something you typically expect from an open world title, and honestly that aspect might have played into the more divisive reception the game had. A lot of people at the time were expecting a medieval GTA, and Assassin's Creed is absolutely not that. Then Assassin's Creed is just really important to me personally. There's the career aspect. Even though I have played many Ubisoft titles before Assassin's Creed, it is this precise game that made me go, I want to work in the company that made this. But there is an even deeper personal connection. I come from a very orthodox country, and while in high school I was pressured a lot because I didn't believe in God. Pretty much every classmate thought it was their responsibility to try and prove to me why I was wrong. As a defense mechanism, I would often argue back and try to prove everybody else wrong, and Assassin's Creed has helped to cope with that. And mind you, not because of its implications that God doesn't exist that would put me in the right for my beliefs, but because of the creed. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. We all are free to make our own choices and bear the responsibility of those choices ourselves. It has changed my outlook on this and many other aspects of life. I have made my choices, everybody else has done theirs for the reasons they believe to be right. And looking at the high school problem in particular from this side has helped me make them accept my beliefs, while at the same time preventing me from trying to prove them wrong as a defense mechanism, effectively me accepting their beliefs as well. And from a political aspect, while Assassin's Creed didn't define my views, it helped to put into words a lot of things I already found to be true. I was 17 when I first played this game, right at the age when these kinds of things would make an incredibly big impression, and the overall concept of individual responsibility being how we find peace within ourselves and with others is something that has resonated with me greatly, but also the other aspects that the Creed promotes. Equality, diversity, cooperation. While it might not be stated directly, the Creed of Assassins makes it abundantly clear that it is important to have a wide tapestry of cultures, thoughts, all of which will be accepting of one another and cooperating with each other, something that sadly doesn't happen a lot in the real world. Not to mention there's a number of Assassin's Creed fans that just ignore the principles the game teaches and spout a lot of hate online, and that's sad on a totally different level, though perhaps not as sad as when the studio developing and publishing a game about equality and diversity doesn't always hold true to these values itself, although hope that things will get better always remains. But regardless, everything I have told is why out of all scores for emotions, Assassin's Creed gets assigned a clear 10. It is a flawed game, but it's a game that is very important to me personally, that has affected my life deeply, and honestly, it is an absolutely rare breed of games that does so, not to mention unique to every person in particular. We have been talking for quite some time now, so let's summarize our final conclusions. When all scores and weights of the categories are taken together, Assassin's Creed gets a final Stasocritic rating of 83. And mind you, my scoring system is built specifically to avoid inflation of 90+ scores. Getting those is exceptionally hard, and getting 80+ is difficult as well. So any title that does, even if it's flawed, is great. Assassin's Creed may not be a game for everyone. I have detailed in the design section why that would be mostly the case. But it certainly is a unique experience that even the sequels don't really fully recreate. Most importantly though, the game has something to say, and I personally think that it's worth hearing it out. As such, I would recommend you to play it, and if you've tried once already but didn't like it, try again, but this time with the HUD turned off. Trust me, it will completely change the way you play. And even if you don't want to play the game HUD-Less, give it another chance anyway. I found that nowadays many people who replay the first Assassin's Creed tend to look at it with a different mindset that makes them appreciate it much more, and who knows, you might turn out to be among those people.